The blood on my hands wasn't mine. I stared at the crimson streaks across my palms, watching them blur as tears finally came. Not tears of regret, tears of relief. After 3 years of careful planning, of swallowing my rage like poison, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, it was finally over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. Not with blood, but with music. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Petrov, and for the past decade, I've been known as the finest piano tuner in Seattle. My reputation was built on perfect pitch, steady hands, and an almost supernatural ability to coax the purest sound from even the most damaged instruments. Concert halls paid premium rates for my services. Wealthy collectors trusted me with their priceless Steinways and Bosendorfers. I had a waiting list 6 months long. What nobody knew was that perfect pitch and steady hands make you exceptional at other things too, like detecting lies in someone's voice, like performing delicate tasks that require absolute precision, like dismantling a person's entire life without them noticing until it's far too late. Before I continue, I want to thank you for reading this. If stories of justice interest you, stay with me. This one goes deeper than you might expect. I met Nathan Harrington at the Seattle Symphony Hall 5 years ago. I was there to tune the concert grand piano before a performance. He was there as a guest of the symphony's board, a successful real estate developer who donated generously to the arts. Tall, handsome, with silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of confident smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He watched me work, asked intelligent questions about temperament and harmonics, and invited me to dinner. I said no. He came back the next week with flowers and asked again. I said no. The third week, he brought a recording of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, my favorite, and told me he'd been listening to it trying to understand what I heard that made my work so perfect. That time, I said yes. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Nathan was everything I thought I wanted: successful, cultured, attentive. He attended my recitals when I occasionally performed. I attended his business galas. 6 months later, he proposed with a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother. We married in a small ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. The first year was perfect, or so I believed. The cracks started showing in year 2. Small things at first. Nathan would disappear for hours without explanation. He'd receive phone calls that made his face go tight, and he'd leave the room to take them. He started drinking more. Not enough to call him an alcoholic, but enough that I noticed the level in the whiskey, bottles dropping faster than before. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd returned early from a concert in Portland. The job had been canceled last minute. The pianist was sick, and I decided to surprise Nathan with dinner. I parked in our driveway at 8 p.m. and noticed his study light was on. Through the window, I could see him at his desk, but he wasn't alone. 3 men I'd never seen before sat across from him. Even from outside, I could read the tension in their postures. One man was gesturing angrily. Nathan's face was pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. I should have walked in. Should have asked what was wrong. Instead, something made me stay in the shadows and listen. Our study window had been installed incorrectly. There was a gap in the weather stripping that Nathan kept meaning to fix. In the quiet night air, with my trained ear for picking up subtle sounds, I could hear fragments of their conversation. 2 weeks, Nathan. That's all you get. Already paid you $50,000. Interest compounds daily. You know the terms. My wife doesn't know. Please. My blood went cold. Loan sharks. My husband was dealing with loan sharks. I crept back to my car and drove around for 2 hours, my mind racing. When I finally returned home, the men were gone and Nathan was in bed, pretending to sleep. I lay beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing, and realized I didn't know this man at all. The next morning, I started digging. Nathan thought I was just a piano tuner, someone who understood music but nothing else. He didn't know that I'd grown up in Moscow, daughter of a forensic accountant who'd worked for the Russian government tracking corruption. He didn't know that before I specialized in piano tuning, I'd been trained in my father's profession, learning to follow money trails and uncover hidden financial crimes. I'd left that world behind after my father was killed for discovering the wrong secret, but the skills never left me. I started with our joint accounts. Nathan handled all our finances. I'd trusted him completely. Within 3 days, I discovered we were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, lines of credit exhausted, and massive cash withdrawals that corresponded to no legitimate expense I could identify. But that was just the surface. I hacked into Nathan's laptop while he was at a business dinner. His password was pathetically simple: our wedding date. Inside, I found a world of deception that made my stomach turn. Nathan's real estate development company was a fraud. For the past 4 years, he'd been running a Ponzi scheme, taking investment money from new clients to pay returns to old ones. The luxury condos he claimed to be developing didn't exist. The shopping centers he'd secured funding for were imaginary. He'd stolen over $12 million from investors who trusted him. The loan sharks were the least of his problems. The FBI was investigating him. There were emails from his lawyer discussing prison sentences, messages to his business partner about fleeing to countries without extradition treaties, and there were emails about me. Elena still doesn't suspect anything. Her income from piano tuning covers our lifestyle expenses, which helps maintain the illusion. If things fall apart, I'll divorce her before the indictments come down. Let her keep the house. It's in her name anyway. I'll disappear with the offshore accounts. I read that email 3 times, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the mouse. He'd married me for cover. My respectable career, my innocent trust, my complete ignorance of his crimes, it all made him look legitimate. I was a prop in his con game. But the worst part came next. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Buried in a folder marked "Personal," I found photographs. Not of us, of my mother, Anna Petrova, who died 2 years before I met Nathan. Except in these photos, she was alive, looking terrified, sitting across from Nathan in what looked like a restaurant. The date stamp was 6 months before her death. My mother had died in a car accident. The police said she'd lost control on a wet road and crashed into a ravine. I'd grieved alone in a foreign country, having moved to America only a year earlier. Nathan had supported me through that grief when we started dating. He'd held me when I cried about how I'd never gotten to say goodbye. Now I was looking at proof that he'd known her, had met with her, 6 months before she died. I found the next piece in his deleted emails, recovered with software I'd learned to use in Moscow. An exchange with someone named Victor. The old woman knows too much. She recognized the accounts from her days tracking oligarchs. If she goes to authorities, everything collapses. What do you want me to do? Make it look like an accident. I'll wire the usual fee. I sat in Nathan's study until dawn, staring at those messages. My husband hadn't just married me as cover for his crimes. He'd murdered my mother to protect his secrets. The piano tuner in me understood harmony and discord. The accountant's daughter in me understood that some crimes couldn't be solved by simply calling the police. Nathan had covered his tracks too well. He had expensive lawyers, offshore accounts, and connections to dangerous people. If I went to the authorities, he'd disappear before they could build a case. The money would vanish. Justice would never come. But the daughter in me, the woman who'd lost her mother and been used as an unwitting accomplice, understood something else entirely. Revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's a symphony that must be composed with precision, played with perfect timing, and delivered with devastating effect. I spent the next 3 years planning. During the day, I continued being Elena the piano, tuner, maintaining my reputation and my innocence. I tuned pianos for the symphony, for universities, for wealthy collectors. I smiled at Nathan over breakfast and asked about his day. I played the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. At night, while Nathan slept or met with his criminal associates, I became someone else entirely. I used my father's training to map Nathan's entire empire of fraud. Every fake development, every shell company, every investor he'd defrauded, every account where he'd hidden money. I documented everything with the precision I brought to tuning pianos, every detail perfect, every note in place. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed to understand his entire network. Who were the loan sharks threatening him? Who was Victor, the man he'd hired to kill my mother? Who were his business partners, his lawyers, his enablers? I created fake identities online and infiltrated their communications. I planted listening devices in Nathan's study, in his car, even in his office. My perfect pitch meant I could hear conversations through walls that others would miss. My steady hands meant I could install surveillance equipment without leaving traces. Slowly, the full picture emerged. Nathan wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme. He was laundering money for a Russian organized crime syndicate. The same syndicate my mother had been investigating before she fled Russia. They'd found her in America through Nathan, who'd met her while researching my background before he decided to marry me. When she recognized the financial patterns he was using, they'd ordered her death. I'd married my mother's killer. The knowledge should have destroyed me. Instead, it crystallized my purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice for my mother, for Nathan's victims, for everyone his crimes had touched. I began the first phase of my plan: financial dismantling. Using the access I'd gained to Nathan's systems, I started making subtle changes. A decimal point moved here, a wire transfer delayed there, account numbers transposed by a single digit. To anyone else, these would look like simple errors. But in the world of high-level fraud, simple errors compound into catastrophic consequences. Nathan's Ponzi scheme started to collapse from within. Payments to early investors were delayed. New investments mysteriously went to the wrong accounts. His careful balancing act began to wobble. I watched him grow increasingly stressed. He drank more, slept less, had angry phone calls with his partners. The loan sharks increased their pressure. I'd anonymously tipped them off that Nathan had more money than he'd admitted. The FBI investigation intensified. I'd sent them carefully crafted anonymous tips that pointed them toward evidence they'd missed. But I wasn't done. Not nearly done. Phase 2 involved his criminal network. Using the information I'd gathered, I created a masterpiece of manipulation. I sent anonymous messages to Nathan's Russian mob connections, making it look like he was stealing from them. I leaked information about Victor to rival gangs, making him a target. I ensured that Nathan's business partners started suspecting each other of skimming money. His empire began to turn on itself, everyone suspecting everyone else. The loan sharks, the mobsters, the corrupt lawyers, the crooked business partners. They all started looking at Nathan as the weak link who needed to be eliminated. I was conducting a symphony of destruction, and every instrument was perfectly tuned to my will. Phase 3 was the most dangerous, the evidence about my mother. I couldn't go to the police directly. Victor had been careful, and Nathan's connections meant he could make evidence disappear. Instead, I used my mother's old contacts in Russia. My father might be dead, but his colleagues remembered Anna Petrova. When I reached out with proof that the man who'd ordered her death was in Seattle, they were very interested in helping. What I needed from them was simple: testimony. Written statements about my mother's work investigating Russian money laundering. Proof that she'd fled Russia because she'd discovered accounts linked to organized crime. A paper trail that would make it impossible for Nathan to claim her death was just an accident. They provided everything I asked for, plus something I hadn't expected: their own evidence about Victor. Turns out he'd been bragging about the American job in the wrong circles. They had recordings, photographs, proof that would hold up in any court. By month 32 of my 3-year plan, everything was in position. Nathan's Ponzi scheme was in free fall. His mob connections wanted him dead. The FBI was weeks away from indictments, and I had evidence that would prove he'd murdered my mother. But I wanted one more thing. I wanted him to know that I'd done this, that the innocent wife he'd manipulated and used had been the architect of his complete destruction. I planned the revelation for our anniversary. 5 years since we'd married in that ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. Nathan had suggested dinner at home. He couldn't afford restaurants anymore, though he didn't tell me that. I agreed and spent the day cooking his favorite meal: braised short ribs, roasted vegetables, the expensive wine I knew he loved. I set the table with our finest china and lit candles. When Nathan came home, he looked haggard. His suit was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes. The confident man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone desperate and afraid. "You okay?" I asked, kissing his cheek. "Just work stress," he muttered, heading straight for the whiskey. We ate mostly in silence. I watched him drink 3 glasses of wine quickly, his hands trembling slightly. Finally, after I'd cleared the dinner plates, I brought out dessert, a chocolate torte from the Russian bakery my mother used to love. "Happy anniversary," I said, setting it in front of him. Nathan barely looked at it. "Yeah, happy anniversary." I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table. "I have something to tell you." He glanced up, probably expecting me to announce I was pregnant or wanted to take a trip. Instead, I pulled out a folder from beneath my chair and slid it across the table. "What's this?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Open it." He did. The first page was a flowchart showing his entire Ponzi scheme, every fake development, every defrauded investor, every hidden account. His face went white. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," I said calmly. "Keep looking." The next pages showed the evidence I'd gathered: communications with the Russian mob, wire transfers for money laundering, and then near the back the emails about my mother, the photographs, the message to Victor. Nathan's hands were shaking so badly the papers rustled. "Elena, I can explain—" "No need," I interrupted. "I already know everything. I've known for 3 years. The color drained from his face completely. 3 years? Since the night I came home early and heard you with the loan sharks. since I hacked your computer and discovered what you really are. I leaned forward. You killed my mother, Nathan. You murdered her because she recognized your money laundering operation. It wasn't... I didn't... He stammered, then stopped. We both knew there was no point in lying anymore. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. In approximately 15 minutes, FBI agents are going to knock on that door with a warrant for your arrest. I've given them everything they need to convict you, the Ponzi scheme, the money laundering, all of it. Nathan's eyes darted toward the door, probably calculating if he could run. Don't bother, I continued. Your offshore accounts have been frozen. Your business partners have been arrested. Victor has been killed by his own associates. Apparently, someone tipped them off that he was informing to the police. I smiled coldly. And the Russian mob thinks you've been stealing from them. Even if you escape the FBI, you won't last a week. You did this? He whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. You orchestrated all of this. Every single piece. I spent 3 years dismantling your life exactly the way you dismantled mine. Exactly the way you destroyed my mother. I stood up, looking down at the man I'd once thought I loved. You married me thinking I was just a simple piano tuner, someone who understood music but nothing dangerous. I leaned close, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. But you forgot something, Nathan. My mother taught me to follow money before she taught me to follow music, and my father taught me that the quietest people are often the most dangerous. I straightened. You killed the wrong woman, because her daughter inherited every skill she had, and she taught me how to use them. The knock came at the door exactly on schedule. FBI! We have a warrant! Nathan looked at me, his face a mask of shock and despair. Why didn't you just turn me in 3 years ago? I thought about my mother, dying alone on that wet road, about the 3 years I'd spent sleeping next to her killer, about every investor he'd defrauded and every life he'd destroyed. Because going to prison wasn't enough, I said quietly. I needed you to lose everything first. Your money, your reputation, your freedom, your life. I needed you to understand exactly how it feels to be destroyed by someone you underestimated. The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Nathan was on the ground in seconds, being handcuffed and read his rights. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. I loved you, he said, and I think he actually believed it. No, I replied. You loved what I represented. The perfect cover for your crimes. The innocent wife who would never suspect. But you chose wrong, Nathan, because this innocent wife was never innocent at all. They took him away. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by the remains of our anniversary dinner, and felt nothing but emptiness. The trial took 8 months. Nathan pled guilty to everything: fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. His lawyers tried to negotiate a deal, but the evidence I'd provided was so comprehensive that prosecutors didn't need to bargain. He got 30 years in a federal prison. Victor's death was ruled a gang killing. The Russian mob moved on to other operations. Nathan's business partners each got their own sentences. His investors recovered about 60% of their money from the accounts I'd helped authorities locate. As for my mother's murder, Nathan eventually confessed to that too. Facing 30 years in prison, he finally told the truth about ordering her death. It didn't change his sentence, but it gave me something I'd needed. Official acknowledgement that she'd been killed, not killed in an accident. The media called me a hero. The FBI offered me a job as a consultant. Nathan's victims thanked me for getting their money back. But I didn't feel heroic. I felt exhausted. 6 months after Nathan's conviction, I sold our house and moved to a small town in Oregon. I still tune pianos, but now I do it in a quiet workshop surrounded by mountains, instead of in concert halls surrounded by crowds. Sometimes people recognize me from the news coverage, but mostly they just know me as the woman who can make any piano sing. Late at night, I sometimes think about those 3 years I spent planning my revenge, about the person I became in order to destroy Nathan, about whether justice and revenge are really different things or just two names for the same need. I think about my mother, who died because she knew too much, about my father, who died the same way, about the price of knowledge and the cost of justice. And I think about Nathan sitting in his prison cell, probably still, trying to understand how the innocent piano tuner destroyed his entire world. The answer is simple, though he'll never truly grasp it. He thought he was clever, marrying someone who seemed naive and harmless. He thought he'd found the perfect cover for his crimes. But he forgot the most important rule: never underestimate the quiet ones. Because we're not quiet because we're weak. We're quiet because we're listening, learning, planning, waiting for exactly the right moment to show you what we're really capable of. And when that moment comes, we strike with a precision that would make a perfectly tuned piano sound like chaos in comparison. My name is Elena Petrov. I tune pianos for a living. And I destroyed the man who killed my mother with nothing more than patience, intelligence, and the skills she taught me before she died. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have just called the police and let the system handle it. But those people didn't grow up watching their father track corruption until it killed him. Didn't lose their mother to a man who thought murder was just another business transaction. Didn't spend 3 years sleeping next to a killer while planning his complete destruction. They don't understand that sometimes justice isn't about what's legal. It's about what's necessary. It's about making absolutely certain that the people who destroy innocent lives face consequences that match their crimes. Nathan took everything from me: my mother, my trust, my innocence. So I took everything from him: his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, his future. And you know what? I'd do it all again. Because in the end, revenge isn't about being better than the person who wronged you. It's about making sure they never wrong anyone else again. It's about sending a message to everyone who thinks they can use and discard people without consequence. That message is simple. Choose your victims carefully, because you never know when the quiet piano tuner you married for cover is actually a trained forensic accountant with nothing left to lose and 3 years to plan your destruction. The blood on my hands that night, it was metaphorical, not literal. I never physically harmed Nathan. I didn't need to. I destroyed him with spreadsheets and surveillance, with precision and patience, with all the skills he never knew I possessed. And that's the most beautiful revenge of all. Not violence, but the complete dismantling of someone's life, using nothing but their own crimes against them. My mother would have been proud. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.